I'll get started. I'm happy that you're here. I'm happy to be here with you. I wanted to share with you some of my research on this topic, which I think is very important to the veterinary community. It's not just an issue of just Black veterinarians, but it's also the different shades socioculturally of Blackness, but also in terms of the socioeconomics in which there is discrimination, not only in terms of the color of the skin, but also in terms of economics. And so what I'm going to be sharing with you is the intersectionality of artificial intelligence in terms of the fourth industrial revolution, and also the impacts that we as veterinarians and minority veterinarians, including women of different ethnic groups, have got to deal with in the now and in the future. But I also wanted to look at another component of that intersectionality, and that is the losing of the Asclepian authority of veterinarians, whereby veterinarians around the world, but especially in the Western culture, have been losing that authority to heal, which is a kind of an authority similar to the anointing of kings. And I'm using this example of Hermes Trismegistus, who is also known as Thoth, and who is symbolized as a sort of half-human, half-god, a mythological figure from beyond ancient times. And that losing of that component, that intersectionality with the fourth industrial revolution, with the impact it's having on our biological clocks, will be the focus of my discussion. So when we look at what we need to pay attention to in terms of our wellness as minority veterinarians, as disadvantaged veterinarians, we can look at these components, but this is a kind of medicine. It's called lifestyle medicine. It's called lifestyle health. There's actually also a track to become board certified in this area, whether you are a veterinarian or a physician. But it's more or less a focus on our own health and our own well-being. And one aspect of that is the influence of our biological clocks and also our DNA methylation clocks. But the aspect with the Industrial Revolution is that we seem to be losing that ability to control our own clocks, and we have become more and more controlled by a mechanized type of policy making, which is influencing the incidence of comorbidities in the veterinary community and in the health community. And one reason is because of the fact that we are shift workers, And as shift workers, our clocks, our circadian clocks, which should be accustomed or entrained by the Zeitberger of 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of sunlight, that has been disrupted. And so this is just a model of the clock genes: BMAL, clock, cry, and how they work, but how they're also influenced by our sleep-wake cycle, and how disrupting that sleep-wake cycle can have an effect at a cell and molecular level, because these clocks are under the control of the master clock in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is close to the hypothalamus. But part of that mechanism is a negative feedback loop involving transcription and translation of DNA. So the evidence is now accumulating that we can influence or we can modulate our epigenome and then modulate the outcome of our health, especially in terms of controlling accelerated aging, which is contributing to many of the comorbidities that we suffer in as veterinarians. And if we look at one aspect of this, when we look at the DNA methylation clocks, it's not just an issue of hypermethylation or hypomethylation. It's what is happening in each case and how they're contributing to the accelerated aging in our lives, whether we are minority or non-minority veterinarians. Because what happens is the hypomethylation is genome-wide, and the hypermethylation occurs at specific promoters in our DNA. Methylation serves as a means of silencing gene expression, but sometimes there is a need to silence that gene expression, and other times a need to not silence it in terms of health and diseases. So this is what happens with the DNA methylation, which contributes to the silencing of gene expression, which sometimes we need to do to, for example, control the expression of oncogenes, which can lead to carcinogenesis, or to genes which can lead to oxidation or superoxidation or oxidative stress in our lives. And so this is an illustration of what can happen if there is that imbalance of hypomethylation and hypermethylation, and how it influences the aging of our DNA methylation clocks. And so there are all of these clocks in our bodies, and we sometimes take them for granted without regard for the daylight cycle, without regard for the accelerated aging. And then when we come down with comorbidities, we tend to just look superficially to use different types of drugs to deal with the comorbidities when the problems are problems with our clocks. And one aspect, of course, is the shedding of our skin. Animals do that, and we as humans do that. And one great evidence of that is if you look sometimes in your apartment, you see those kind of looking dusty, spiderweb type of artifacts in that moment. You wonder where they come from. It's our skin that we're shedding. This is more or less a summary of the methylation and the control of gene expression and gene silencing, and how that can lead either to carcinogenesis or other types of chronic, other types of comorbidities. But these are two big clocks, the DNA methylation clocks, the Hobart clock and the Hannon clock. But for African Americans, we can see a high correlation between chronological age and biological age for both clocks. But the more reliable clock is the Hobart's clock, because that assesses the cytosine CPG, or the cytosine phosphate DNA methylation at about 350 sites compared to the Han's clock, which only targets about 71 sites, and primarily in blood, or white blood cells and some red blood cells, while in the Hobart clock, it's almost pantropic. It can be used for many tissues and organs. This again is important for the African American community because there seems to be a coexistence of 85 of those methylation sites with the glucocorticoid receptor, which has a lot of consequences for stress and stress-related diseases in the African American community. This is again showing how that interaction between hypomethylation and hypermethylation can lead to DNA methylation, in which there is metabolic syndrome, or DNA metabolic syndrome, in whites compared to African Americans. But then that brings us to the intersectionality of the fourth industrial revolution and the impact it's having, but my emphasis is the impact it's having on our clock genes, including and especially the DNA methylation clocks. And so there is mounting evidence that by modulating our states of consciousness by mind-body intervention, we can modulate our epigenome and therefore prevent ourselves from coming down with those comorbidities, especially in the African American community, but in general, in disadvantaged communities where those communities have been subject to a great deal of exploitation and the stress arising from those exploitations. And so it's like we've got so many clocks and so many different organ systems in our body, and we take them for granted even when they are out of control and pharmacologic interventions cannot deal with them effectively. And one way is the float tank, which used to be called the sensory deprivation float tank. But the technique is also called flotation-reduced environmental stimulation technique. And what it does is the individual is immersed in a hyperosmolar solution of magnesium sulfate, which produces a microgravity effect. That microgravity effect will then cause the person, because their consciousness is no longer pulled down by gravity, you're no longer pulled down into your body, you tend to start looking inwards, and therefore you immediately get into these altered states of consciousness. And one of those altered states is a generalized altered state of consciousness, which is kind of similar to the states that you may have when you're daydreaming. But it goes beyond that. There are three other states. One is the relaxation response, which meditators and yogis experience. The other is mindfulness. And one that's very important, I feel, for minority veterinarians or veterinarians in general, is called the shamanistic state of consciousness, in which you can do a lot of miraculous stuff in terms of the interaction of your mind and body, which used to be reserved for shamans, but which we as individuals in the healing community have lost because of the input of excessive scientific medicine or the dependence on excessive scientific medicine. And I want to interject a bit of an anecdote connected to the float tank, because Dr. John Willie was the one who originated the idea of the float tank. But he was quite an eccentric physician scientist, and but with quite a lot of influence. In fact, his influence was so great that Hollywood made two movies about him. One of them was The Day of the Dolphin, with George C. Scott, and the other one was Altered States, which was released in the early 80s when I was still in veterinary school. But by the time I graduated from veterinary school and I decided to specialize in aquatic medicine, one day during my internship, I took time off to go to a yoga retreat in Florida. And a yogini told me, "Oh, you're working with dolphins? Do you know who John Lilly is?" I said, "No." She said, "Well, he's the guy who worked with a lot of dolphins, but he's also into yoga and meditation and altered states." So I said, "Wow," and she brought me a book about him, which I read. I said, "Geez, I wish I could have an internship and work in this guy's laboratory in the Bahamas with dolphins." But the opportunity never arose because I ended up going back to Guyana and being appointed as a veterinary officer in charge of the Georgetown Zoo. But what also happened was I got the opportunity to pursue a doctoral degree at A.T. Still University. I decided, I would study to unravel why is it that killer whales attack and mortally injure their trainers, because I had a hypothesis arising from the work I did with cargo purposes for one of my postgraduate trainings at the London Zoo and at the Royal Red College, and I thought the two would dovetail into each other. Well, to my surprise, my doctoral committee rejected my proposal. So I had to spend a whole semester writing it over. And I wrote it over with the idea of looking at altered states of consciousness in expert floaters and individuals who were novice floaters. And the committee accepted. But the story before that was 2 decades or more ago. Before that, a world authority on marine mammals said, "Oh, Dr. John Lilly, please avoid him. He uses ketamine as vitamin K." And this authority on whales and dolphins said that she had to take over his work from at UC Davis. So I tried to avoid working with him, working in association with him or so. But there was my doctoral committee saying that, it's good for me to pursue studies with a float tank, which is what I did. And this is me at the 2018 float conference trying out the dry float tank and getting into those states of consciousness. But there are other ways of alleviating or managing that accelerated aging process, and one of them is biofeedback, and this is a purchasable hardware called Alive, which I highly recommend to my veterinary colleagues, because biofeedback is a form of electronic yoga or meditation. And in terms of assessing your age or how your age is accelerating, the Hobart clock or the kit is available for the consumers to purchase. It can either be a saliva sample that you submit or a blood sample. But in one of the future studies that I plan to conduct, I'm going to let my participants use saliva because I don't have to answer a lot of questions on the institutional review board about people pricking themselves and all the other issues with that, especially in the case of possibly hemophilia. I wanted to end with this very interesting case in which this is from one of the participants in one of the studies I conducted for my training in hypnosis and also in biofeedback, in which this was an individual, a Latinx lady who is highly trained as an administrator, but there was this glass ceiling for her. And she was being prevented from moving up the ladder. And she wants to know if she could use hypnosis to break through that barrier. So I helped her because in hypnosis, the person who's supposed to be the hypnotizer is really not the hypnotizer. They're just helping the person to induce the hypnosis themselves. So I got her to get into a state where she imagined herself to be adaptable and malleable like an octopus. And she said that her whole arm became like the tentacles of an octopus. But and that kind of helped her to become very malleable and deal with her situation. But there was another experience in another session in which she saw herself being dressed in her executive suit and going somewhere. And lo and behold, several weeks later, the pandemic struck, the schools had to be closed, and she was appointed to the very administrative position that before the pandemic, there were all kinds of difficulties to get it, and she held it for 2 years because of her hypnotic experience. This is a study in biofeedback, a session that she did, in which she underwent several stress tests, and it's showing that with those stress tests, including starting with her eyes open and then testing her with mental math, it shows how after the mental math, which may include counting from 100 backwards, she was kind of a bit stressed out, so her respiratory rate went up during the mental math, but she was able to recover what it was like before the mental math. And then when she did the stroke test, her respiration rate was lowered, and immediately after, she was very close to recovering from it. And that, I think, that ability, that resilience came from her experience with using the hypnotic techniques and also her experience in meditation. In closing, I wanted to talk about this individual because he is sort of what we'll be seeing in the future in terms of managing the reducing of our aging, and that is using the hyperbaric chamber to hyperoxygenate. And this individual has broken the record for the person who has lived the longest in a hyperbaric chamber. I think he did that today. Today was his 100th day, and he broke his own record in Florida. I'm actually coming from a meeting which I represented a paper last week in Florida, and I had an opportunity to talk to him. And he's interested in collaborating with me with respect to the aspects of aging and circadian rhythm. But I think he would be great to talk with the veterinary community, not just the minority veterinary community. And he's called Dr. Deep Dive, a professor from Deep Sea, professor from the University of South Florida. And his real name is Dr. Joe DeTulley. I can't close without paying some tribute to some of the individuals who made a difference in my life. Here in New Orleans, it's a homecoming for me because I lived in New Orleans for about 3 years. I studied in Tulane, and my experience of those 3 years, it was serendipity on steroids. Because one day, my professor, Dr. Hartley, came up to me and he said, what are you doing? At the time I was in a work study program, looking at dwarf mice brains. It was good work. But he said, you seem to know all the questions that I asked in the class. Would you like to work in my lab? It's a Department of Defense Fellowship. It's going to delay your studies, but you'll work full-time with a full-time salary, and you'll be able to take 6 credit hours per semester. So I took it, and I worked with him to develop a bioassay for sublethal, low exposure carcinogens, and the rest was history in a way. And the day I had to defend my dissertation was a Friday afternoon like this in the Texaco building, right down Canal Street. And in the middle of my defense, my examiners, who are the three individuals, stopped me. They had a whispered conversation, and then they said, "Congratulations, you got your MSPH. We encourage you to stay on Tulane and pursue your doctoral degree." I did stay on, but then I was induced intellectually to go to the University of Illinois on Pfizer postdoctoral fellowship, which then led to me going to London for postgraduate studies for training in zoo medicine. But I also have to mention a bit about my cultural background. I did check my genes, and there is that influence from my European ancestry, but also from the ancestry of the Dogon people in West Africa. And they were associated with ancient Egypt, but in modern times, they were the ones that pointed out to the astrophysicists that there was another set of stars. And then, lo and behold, modern astronomy discovered those stars, the Sirius system. Without these individuals at Saybrook University, where I'm currently pursuing another doctoral degree, it's my third doctoral degree. This presentation would not have been possible, nor the presentation last week at the annual conference of the American Association of Applied Psychophysiology and Biofeedback. These are individuals, except for Dr. Appel. Well, except for Dr. Appel, they're all from Saybrook, but all of them are the individuals who write the books and publish a lot of the groundbreaking work in psychophysiology, stress physiology, and as well as work with biological clocks. And I'm grateful for being invited to come here and talk to you about this exciting area of investigation that is currently having an impact on our lives as veterinarians, whether we're minority veterinarians or non-minority veterinarians, but also what it is doing in terms of our clocks, because we are shift workers. We do work emergency hours, and believe it or not, the suicide rate or suicide ideation that we have been seeing in the veterinary community could be attributed to the clock disruption, which has not been thoroughly explained to us. And so with that, I would end my presentation. Again, I'm happy that you're here, and I'm happy to be here with you. Any questions? I'm open to those or comments. Thank you.
Very interesting.
So any questions, concerns, comments?